as if there's been almost like a collision of things, like that perfect storm idea, where you've got technology making its rise. There's also been a missing generational handoff, as you've articulated. On one level, I look at the parents and I go, well, I mean, you're fighting things now that the previous generations didn't, in that the internet. I mean, uh, we came of age during the time when the internet is just in its infancy, and yet emerging into adulthood. I remember my first pastorate. I mean, we were online, but it had only been online for a few years at that time. Social media was still not there yet. Not everybody was a part of it. And now I see the world that my kids are in, and it's very different. But I still have that experience of it, whereas my parents did not have any idea of it. And I remember listening to Nate Bargatze, though, and he said, I grew up in the 80s when my parents became Christian, and they were the most Christian in the 80s and the 90s. And it just made me laugh, because I'm like, well, wait a minute. You have a lot of these people that were raised in very conservative evangelical homes, and yet there's been a big drop off. The baton was dropped. Is it technology, or were there other factors involved?
Well, we learned something, maybe it was a little surprising, and that's people. It doesn't matter how old, what decade, or what birth cohort you were in. Everybody self-identified as being most religious between the age of 0 to 18, and they were the least religious in their life between
18 and
not,
30?
yeah, 18 and 29.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the graph goes back up after that decade, but never reaching that initial point from 0 to 18. So, there's just, I mean, there's a million things that we could say about, how to make sense out of that phenomenon. I mean, some of that is just, as you grow older and you have more experience, I think, and I think for most people, things become more gray over time, and you begin to differentiate the things that you actually know from the things that you thought that the thought that
Yeah.
you knew. And certainly in middle age, I think that's where a lot of people are at. And then as you're towards the end of your life, you're certain about the things that you're certain, but everything else, I think you tend to be more open-handed on. However, there's just so much in flux in that 18 to 29-year-old time frame. You have the transition from high school into either university or into the workforce. Then you have the handoff between, for those who go to university and career. And then you have the handoff between early career and marriage and parenting. So at each one of those different handoffs, we saw some pretty big drop offs at each of those things. And so I think that there's a lot for us to learn on both the parenting side there, and there's a lot for us to learn as missiological best practices in the local church, and keeping in mind, especially 13 to 30, there's just so much that's in flux during that time frame. We've got to remember how much changes, in those 17 years, and we have to have proactive approaches for how we help people at each one of those, kind of baton passes, so that we don't, kind of drop the baton, so to speak.